Why do people lose their mind when I say I do not want children at all? Especially my parents or just anybody in general.
Am I the only one that the older I get, and like I was always somebody who leaned towards not wanting to have children, but the older I get, the more of a no-brainer it is that it's like definitely like don't have children.
I'm a child-free man, and I've got to be honest, part of the reason why I don't want to have kids is that it just doesn't seem like it's very fun.
I will never give birth to a child because I don't have a vagina, so that's not really going to work. But I also don't plan on ever having any children of my own.
So I'm 36 years old, and I currently do not have one child. Not one. I don't have no secret children either. I know I don't.
So apparently a growing number of men have looked at fatherhood, looked at their bank accounts, looked at the dating market, looked at the price of a house, and said, you know what, I'm going to sit this one out. And I can't even pretend I don't understand how somebody gets there. Because having children used to be presented as just adulthood. You grow up, get a job, meet somebody, get married, have children. Simple. Except nobody mentioned that the house might cost $500,000, childcare could compete with your rent, both parents might need to work, and you'll somehow be expected to maintain a relationship, exercise, build a career, save for retirement, spend quality time with your children, and drink 8 glasses of water every day. At this point, just keeping yourself alive feels like a group project. So yes, I understand why some men are looking at the whole arrangement and going, respectfully, no. But then I found something that made this story much more interesting. Some of these men didn't always feel this way. They wanted children. Not everybody, obviously. Before somebody types an 8-paragraph comment, yes, some men genuinely never wanted kids. I see you. You're fine. I'm talking about the guys who spent their 20s saying, eventually I'll meet somebody. Eventually I'll make enough money. Eventually I'll buy a house. Eventually I'll feel ready. And then one day, eventually, quietly becomes, actually, I don't want kids. Now that caught my attention, because there's an old psychological idea hiding underneath this. Human beings don't form our preferences in a vacuum. What feels possible affects what feels desirable. There's actually an ancient version of this idea you probably already know. The fox and the grapes. Fox wants grapes. Fox can't reach grapes. Fox eventually decides the grapes probably weren't that good anyway. And suddenly I'm sitting there thinking, wait, are the grapes fatherhood? I know, stay with me. Because maybe millions of men independently discovered that they genuinely prefer being child-free. But what if some of them didn't stop wanting children first? What if housing became unaffordable first? What if relationships became harder first? What if financial security disappeared first? What if they watched exhausted parents around them first? What if the expectation that you're supposed to provide remained, while the economic conditions that made providing possible completely changed? And then they stopped wanting children. Because those are two very different stories. One says, men changed. The other says, the environment changed and men adapted to it. And I have a feeling the truth is somewhere annoyingly in the middle. I'm Sage, this is Maladaptive Variable, and we're getting into why more men are choosing not to have kids. Because the deeper I went into this, the less convinced I became that this is just about whether men like babies.
Am I the only one that the older I get, and like I was always somebody who leaned towards not wanting to have children, but the older I get, the more of a no-brainer it is that it's like definitely like don't have children. I would say like there's always that little bit that everyone's like, oh, but I had to have a little me running around. But the older I get, I'm more like, listen, things are just getting more and more unpredictable in the world. The last thing I want to do is throw a little child into this that God knows what can happen to this child. Again, this is on the off chance that, of course, everything goes smoothly. This is a healthy child, no behavior problem. But kids, number one, are going to have very little control that you can have. You can sit there and be the best parent. I made a video about this on my burner, on my main account. But there's very little control you really have over your children now. Between social media, they're going to be in school for a majority of the time. You have minimal control over what happens with their personality. On top of that, the financial aspect. A large portion of the population is barely making enough to get by for themselves. and then you want to throw a kid into that. And for me, like, I already know, like, I'm somebody who really, really, like, enjoys their freedom. The last thing I would want is, of course, having something where now, like, I have a responsibility. Like, if I don't do it, I'm kind of a bad person. And I've said this before, if you're ever on the fence, like, listen, worst case scenario, you look back when you're 65, 70 years old, and you're like, oh man, you know what? I should have had a kid. It would have worked out. But worst case scenario, if you have a child and then you realize 5 years in that you don't want to do this anymore, oh, bro, you're screwed.
Having kids is the most significant financial decision you will make in your life. They are incredibly expensive. If you are not rolling in surplus money, looking for places to spend your money every month, you should not be having kids. Do not put yourself in a situation where you cause yourself financial hardship because of your choice to have children. And most importantly, do not bring a child into the world to financially struggle with you. What does that say about you as a parent? Children deserve more than the bare minimum necessary to survive. Are you able to provide that? The choice is yours. Choose wisely.
The reason why birth rates are so low is because people can only afford one kid, and a lot of people can't even afford that. I believe you have to be making $50,000 for every child that you have. If the average income is around 40, 60, 50K a year, one kid, you're done. The second you have a second kid, you need to be making 100K plus. And not even households with both parents make 100K. And we have dumb people out here who make 75K a year with 3 children. You're struggling. I don't care what you tell me of how your household works. You're neglecting them in some space, in some form. Whether it's not giving them complete full insurances, having money for their colleges, any kind of inheritance, all of that gets scratched. And that's what people don't count for. Just because you could feed them, bathe them, and keep a roof over their head doesn't mean you're not neglecting them.
I hate when people say,
Why does no one want to have kids anymore?
why would I want to have kids? That's the real question. Like my generation, Gen Z, the average salary that we make is
$39K a year.
the average cost to raise 2 kids comfortably, $233K a year. The cost to give birth, $20K. There's no free childcare, no free health care. You get no help. So many people don't have benefits. There's no paid time off, no sick leave. Give me one reason why anyone should.
I'm sorry, but I completely understand these men. Because at some point, we have to stop pretending that having a child is just this beautiful, emotional decision where 2 people look into each other's eyes and say, I think we're ready. Ready with what? Because the hospital is not accepting love as payment. Daycare does not take good intentions. Your landlord, unfortunately, cannot be moved by the fact that your baby has your eyes. Children are expensive. And I think what's happening with some men is that they're becoming painfully aware of that before they become fathers. They're doing the math. Housing, food, healthcare, childcare, clothes, school, transportation, emergencies. And that's before your child develops an interest in something ridiculous like competitive gymnastics, and suddenly you're refinancing the house because Madison wants to go to nationals. I'm kidding. Mostly. But listen to what these guys are actually saying. A lot of them aren't saying, I don't like children. They're saying, I cannot give a child the life I would want my child to have right now. And I think that's a really important distinction. Because technically, being able to have a child and feeling financially prepared to raise one are nowhere near the same thing. You can make enough money for diapers. Great. What happens when daycare arrives? What happens when you need another bedroom? What happens when somebody gets sick? What happens if your partner needs time away from work? What happens when your child needs something you didn't conveniently include in the family budget spreadsheet? Children have this really annoying habit of being human beings and therefore completely unpredictable. And I think some men are looking at all of that and going, you know what? Until I know I can handle this properly, I'm not doing it. Which, to me, doesn't sound like men becoming irresponsible. It almost sounds like the opposite. Because there was a time when people would tell you, don't worry about the money, you'll figure it out. And maybe you will. People do it every day. But I also can't look at a man who says, I don't want my child growing up watching me panic every month when the bills arrive, and tell him he's thinking about this too much, especially if he knows what that childhood feels like. Maybe he grew up hearing his parents argue about money. Maybe he remembers being the kid who knew not to ask for something because mom and dad couldn't afford it. Kids notice that stuff. They might not understand mortgages or interest rates, but they understand when money makes the room tense. So when that kid grows up and says, "Before I become somebody's father, I want to know I can provide." Yeah, I get it. And maybe that's one part of what's changing. Some men aren't saying they'll never have children. They're saying they're not willing to create a child first and figure out whether they can afford the responsibility afterward. And considering the price tag attached to raising a human being these days, I don't know. That might be one of the more responsible things we've heard on TikTok. Let's continue with a few more clips.
So I'm 36 years old, and I currently do not have one child. Not one. I don't have no secret children either. I know I don't. And I had a conversation with this guy, and he said, "How old are you?" I said, 36. He says, "Do you have any children?" I said, "No." He says, "What's taking you so long?" And I looked him right in his face, and I said, "I'm going to be honest, man. The way I'm choosing my woman is the way I'm considering my children in the future. I can get married. I can have kids. I can do any of that immediately. But for the sake of my children, the type of woman I choose is extremely important. And while I'm choosing that woman, I'm also building myself into the man I need to be for my kids." Because a lot of times you see people having kids who are not fit to be parents. These kids are literally reflections of the lack of guidance these parents have. These women who are raising these little girls to be literally carbon copies of them. These little boys who are not raised with their fathers and are learning nothing but what they see on the internet, which is detrimental. They don't know how to read. They don't know how to write. They grow up in a world where nobody is willing to teach them anything because they've never learned anything from the people that are supposed to protect and love them. And that's why I am not having a child yet until I am married. And when I'm married, I have to know that the woman I'm marrying is going to be a great mother for my children, just as much as being a wonderful woman to me as I can be a wonderful man to her and a great father to my children.
I'm a child-free man, and I've got to be honest, part of the reason why I don't want to have kids is that it just doesn't seem like it's very fun. People will sometimes act like I must have some complex reason for not wanting kids, but it's actually quite simple. It's not because of some secret childhood trauma, or it's not just a phase. I'm a 34-year-old man. I haven't wavered on this, and my mind is made up. It's just that when I picture the parent life honestly, the day-to-day, the constant logistics, somebody crying, the messes, the worry, the shitty diapers, the same Pixar movie every single day for a year, I think that just doesn't sound like it's that fun. I know that some parts are. I know that when you're a parent and you see your child discover something about the world around them for the first time, that's really special. And the things they say are admittedly kind of funny sometimes. Children are just walking shitposting generators. People will say, yeah, there are these incredible little moments, and I know that's true, like a tiny hand on your face, or a funny thing they say in the back seat, that one perfect holiday photo after 47 attempts. I get it. But the way people describe parenting to me, if I'm being real, it sounds like a handful of beautiful flashes buried inside a ton of stress, exhaustion, scheduling, money, worry, and your whole life not being yours anymore.
I will never give birth to a child because I don't have a vagina, so that's not really going to work. But I also don't plan on ever having any children of my own. I don't plan on ever starting a family and having kids. That seems like a far-off reality that will never come into fruition, and I'm pretty firm on that. I don't think that I will ever want to have children of my own, because if I'm being honest, giving birth to kids nowadays in this current world seems like more of a cruelty than it is anything else. Unless I have enough money to make sure my children don't have to worry about things for the rest of their life, and they don't have to worry about student debt, and they don't have to worry about not being able to pursue what they're passionate in. Obviously, I don't want to raise a bunch of fucking bums. They're still going to have to go out there and do something with their lives. But if I can't provide the very bare minimum for my children and give them a good life, then why the fuck am I having kids? That seems pretty irresponsible on my part. Am I saying that poor people shouldn't have kids? Yeah, probably. But at the end of the day, I know a lot of people are going to tell me, oh, but what about giving your parents grandkids? Or what about having children to continue your legacy? Man, fuck them kids. I promise you they'd probably be happier just being unborn souls, chilling, doing whatever they do, instead of being born into a family that can't support them financially. That's just a stupid idea. The world is already getting more and more overpopulated as is. Things don't seem to be getting cheaper anytime soon. Buying a house is getting more and more expensive every single day. And I start to think to myself, what could I do to improve this situation? I know, maybe I should have 12 different children and lock myself in a cycle of poverty. Yes! Why didn't I think of that before?
I love the fact that the generation before us is shocked that none of us are having children. They're like, why don't you want kids? Meanwhile, every day growing up, our parents were saying things like, oh my God, you have no idea how hard it is raising you guys, how much money it takes to raise a child, how much effort we put in every day. They have the audacity to ask if I want kids? No, I'm broke and lazy, the two things that seem super important apparently.
From these clips, I think we can establish one thing. These men have thought about this. This isn't necessarily some guy waking up Saturday morning, looking at a toddler having a meltdown in Target, and deciding the bloodline ends with him. Although, honestly, that'll make you reconsider some things. A lot of these men are intentionally choosing not to have children. And just like we've been seeing women openly say, motherhood isn't the life I want, men are apparently having their own version of that conversation. They're looking at the money. They're looking at their lifestyles. They're looking at the responsibility. They're thinking about the kind of fathers they would want to become. And some are saying, I'm not ready. Some are saying, maybe someday. And some have inspected the entire package and politely returned it to sender. Now, before I see somebody furiously typing, Sage, these men probably already have kids somewhere they don't take care of. Please spare my comment section. Today is not for the deadbeats. The deadbeats know who they are. If they don't, somebody in their contacts definitely does. We're talking about men making intentional decisions before creating children. Men who are asking themselves whether fatherhood actually suits the life they want, and whether they can provide the kind of childhood they'd want their children to experience. And one guy in those videos said something that made me go, wait, he's got a point. He basically said it's crazy that the generation before us can question why younger people aren't having children when so many people spent their childhood hearing their parents talk about how unbelievably hard it was raising them. Which, hello, you told us. You kids are expensive. Money doesn't grow on trees. Wait until you have children. You'll understand how difficult this is someday. I haven't had a moment to myself since you were born. Then that child grows up and says, actually, I've decided I would like moments to myself. And everybody goes, what happened to your generation? Sir, you gave us the brochure. We read it. And psychologically, I actually think there's something deeper happening there. We learn adulthood by observing it long before we experience it ourselves. Your parents are basically your first advertisement for marriage, work, money, and parenthood. And advertisements work both ways. If what you repeatedly saw was loving parents who were still constantly exhausted, financially stretched, and sacrificing everything to keep the family going, you can love your parents deeply while simultaneously thinking, I don't know if I want their life. That's not necessarily rejecting them. Sometimes it's learning from them. And I think that's an important distinction with these men. Some watched their fathers struggle financially and decided, before I have children, I need to be stable. Some decided, if I ever become a dad, my kids aren't going to grow up worrying about money like I did. And some looked at everything fatherhood requires and went, no, that's not the life for me. And I'm struggling to see what's inherently wrong with that. Because surely the time to discover that you don't want to be a father is before you become somebody's father. Not 3 children later when you're making a podcast about how family life stole your freedom. Please, figure that out beforehand.
Bro, the older I get, the more I feel like I don't want kids. Like, I've always been like this since I was younger. I don't have anything against it, but I've just always, it's kind of selfish, but I've always enjoyed my free time. I'm able to go to the gym in the morning, go to the gym at night, be up late. I can do whatever I want, and I just don't see myself with kids, dude. And I feel like, obviously, if I were to have kids on accident, it'd be a blessing and all that good stuff. Yeah. But like, since I was like 16, 17, 18, I've known that kids aren't for me, bro. I'll be a cool uncle, like when my brother and my sister, they have kids, but
If you don't have children, your bloodline will end. First things first, it's not my bloodline. I did not start this. None of this was my idea, and so it's not my job to continue. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Well, we've come to the end of yet another video, and one thing has become very clear to me. These men are standing on business. Because I've heard women say, I've literally never met a man who doesn't want kids. Ma'am, apparently you haven't been looking hard enough, because I have just spent an entire video with them. They're here. Some don't want kids yet. Some don't want them because they don't believe they can provide the life they'd want for them. Some enjoy their freedom. And some have looked at the entire situation. The diapers, daycare, responsibility, school fees, 18 plus years of somebody asking them for money, and said, nope, this bloodline has had a wonderful run. And you know what? That's their decision. But ladies, gentlemen, everybody listening to me who plans on remaining child-free, I have one request. Please make sure whoever you're dating is on the same page. Not the same chapter, not the same general area of the bookstore. The same page. Because this is not something you want to discover 6 years into a relationship. I thought you knew I wanted kids. Well, I thought you knew I didn't. Excuse me? What have we been discussing for 6 years? Netflix passwords? I don't know. Write a contract or something. Get it laminated. Stick it on the refrigerator. We, the undersigned, do not want children. I'm obviously kidding, because here's the annoying part. Everybody involved is still a human being, and human beings change their minds. That's what makes this complicated. 2 people can genuinely agree at 27 that they never want children, and at 34, one of them wakes up and realizes, actually, I do. Nobody necessarily lied. Nobody necessarily manipulated anybody. Somebody changed. And unfortunately, there isn't really a halfway point between having children and not having children. One person can't have 30% of a baby to keep the relationship together. So if you're absolutely certain you don't want children, please don't date somebody who desperately wants them while secretly hoping they'll eventually come around. And if you desperately want children, don't date somebody who's clearly told you they don't and start planning the nursery in your head because they'll change their mind once we're married. That is a future argument loading. And after watching all of these guys, maybe that's actually what I respect most about the conversation. Whether you agree with their reasons or not, they're thinking about it. Because if you're going to create another human being, well, everybody else was doing it, probably shouldn't be the deciding factor. Now I need to hear from you guys because I already know this comment section is going to be interesting. Men especially. Do you want children? Have you always felt that way? Or were you once completely sure you wanted to become a father and something changed? And ladies, I want your perspective too. Would you date a man who told you he was completely certain he never wanted children? I'm going to be reading these comments. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, subscribe to Maladaptive Variable so you don't miss the next conversation, and share this with somebody who needs to answer the question too. Let's drag them into this. Thank you guys so much for watching and for spending another video with me. I'm Sage, and I'll see you in the next one.